by those who hold power in a stratified society, tucking into just more frequent refusals of research communities of peoples who stand to be researched. Also, the affirmative maintains material, ontological, and cognitive epistemological orientation toward colonialism through notions of property and ownership. This is merely a reversal of laws of conquistorial binaries, which justifies the modification of bodies and lands only through a refusal logic of property and ownership from the alterity of indigeneity, able to posit a new radical relationality towards the notions of cohabitation and coalition. Martin Risk, 2014. An evolutionary native feminist aesthetic is against the law rather than one that continues to demand recognition to uphold the law through a radical relationality with the earth. This refusal was framed against the colonial logic of land as property, not only against the laws of provocation and destruction, but also as a generative reconfiguration of the sensibility reshifts the stellar colonial logic of property through refutation of path to the wild and beyond is paid with refusal as a path to an elsewhere where the logic of property of ownership and exploitation of land does not make sense, where the alliance is built on the shared land ethic might be generated as Tiffany King writes the seller's relationship to properties both material that land is to be conquered, owned, and commodified. It's also a concept that cognitively orders the mind of the seller, shaping and allowing the seller to survey land knowledge and bodies as commodities, constructions, property. It's a powerful cognitive colonialism and knowledge production aesthetics and being for indigenous people and spaces in connection for black people spaces. Radical relationality to the land is birth and the alterity of indigeneity is a live critique of seller modes of knowing and sensing that are cognitively ordered through property and ownership. And when he sees expertise practice of speaking truth to power, calling all systems in a violation assumes an ethic where even the differentially marginalized are absolved from their own implication of maintaining colonial systems of ideation. Tail and 14 universally share responsibility in contemporary conceptions of identity that tend to locate privilege and oppression within specific populations, echoed in the media eruptions over public figures doing or saying something something deemed blatantly racist. The critique of such figures that actions as racist obscures the pervasiveness of colonial structures and implicates everyone. Coloniality does not statically reside in some and not in other structures. Far too pervasive, therefore, is more aptly countered by attending to the ways that we come into relation with coloniality. And also, this is further extended in Halberstam 13. Once not the end of colonialism, the end of the standpoint from which colonialism makes sense, it is in order to bring colonialism to the end, one does not speak truth to power, and one has to have the crazy, nonsensical ranting language of the other. The one who has been rendered a non-entity by colonialism is his willingness to be in a space that has been abandoned by colonialism, by rule, by order. Also, you can go to the case flow really quickly. Here we're going to answer sampling is ahistorical one. Gailey is making clear indication that hip-hop is through a production of sampling that the basis of hip-hop is that one, it challenged the notions of ownership and challenged the owners and ownership through the creation of the sound itself and through the production of the lyrics.
Alright, why is our notion of property, I guess, problematic?
Alright, well, one, from like the standpoint of what happens in this room, like expressing pedagogy, like giving, I guess, curriculum that can be taught is problematic because it exposes this idea that we have to sanitize sort of our works, that there is not a transferability that can happen. Now, empirically, that's been problematic for black and brown bodies, like the relationship that happens between those two, because like ideas of land ownership or reclamation of land or even reclamation of language has always been fucked for black people, it's always been fucked for brown people, and it's happened in sort of
what is the negative presented that's an alternative to a conception of property?
Well, one, all right, we would contend that sampling proper, that would, the sampling that happened within the space is an injection of sort of the notions of property into like, we're not.
I don't understand, like, what about the affirmative is not a resignification or a sampling of stuff that exists within the status quo?
Well, right, well, here's the thing, like, your argument is like, we had our blocks taken from us and shit. Here's how we're going to take it back. It's through hip hop. That we're not critiquing like the affirmative proper, but rather the theory that the affirmative propagates, and is that there is a such thing as fixed property or ownership, and that one can reclaim.
Sure. If our argument is that like you can also sample the AFF, like I don't understand why that means that the AFF isn't good. So
wait,
good
what's
idea.
good?
If you can sample the AFF, isn't just and sampling has been historically used as a method in hip hop. Why is that just not another reason to vote AFF? Because we have said that hip hop is good.
Alright, hip hop is good, like.
So
it's a question of what you do with that hip hop, right? The one in C says, hey, let's take hip hop and use it as a propagation of property. The one in C says, no, hey, that's a lie. That sampling in its essence is a criticism of notions of property. So yes, the one in C's pedagogy is extrapolating
so let's
hip hop,
let's say
what you do with that.
Let's say Joey Badass samples MF Doom. Does that not mean that MF Doom's mixtape was MF Doom's mixtape?
No.
It means that it wasn't his mixtape?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. All right. So then, you make another argument about a double term. What is this argument that you make?
Right, so you kind of like tag on us sort of like we don't use specific signifiers such as like using women doesn't include transgender bodies, using Latino, Latina without the @ sign is problematic. But then like your scholarship, the next card propagates the same sort of instance of violence. So one, we're saying like your production of that violence and tagging it as problematic is probably an isolated reason for why you should lose the debate, because you see back to like sanitized notions of identity.
Okay. Now you say that the app cannot weigh the materiality. The judge cannot weigh the materiality of the app. Why is that true?
Well, one, like, there's nothing that the ballot does to like resolve the gentrification that happens in the boroughs. Like, it's all about the pedagogy that we produce. You say hip hop is good. You say your use of it is problematic.
I just have one with flash drive. Oh, two cards.
Yeah.
I'm just flashing on activity so y'all should not active. The cards are it's just one in our card. There. Hybrid. Pass, toss.
What's it called?
It's just, it should be one in our cards.
Oh, where is it? Is it in the folder?
No, it should be just out.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. We go into no. Say that again. Sorry. Alright, so it's going to be, you can probably just flow this like at the bottom with the 2 in R, or 2 in Z, sorry. I have to maybe do the previous card at some point. Like save the trigger. Good. This round is not about gender differentiation. If anyone was listening, the negative was shifted in and out of different bodies. And this is the position of the object. This is the position of the roach with no stable locus, no home, no body to return, no block to return to. No, this is exactly the Gumsey's evidence in the one NC whole conceded language. She indicates that language is not owned, is not even inheritable, though the desire of power will continue to pretend that it is and will continue to buy and sell it. So dark, so deep, and write it down. Property is never fully successful. Simulation is not a cheap one of the negative. And now the affirmative is only desire to reclaim and re-securitize. Property is also a question of what the position, the Audre Lorde poem in the one NC that instantiates the position of the roach who troubles notions of humanism. The one AC, however, is only a reclamation of humanism, that we should be modern, that we should one day be human. This is Lord in Binghamton. Presence of the other turns humanism through poverty, debating the other, it's all over property, human disrupting, it's property, the roach troubles the property owner, desire, the ability to secure her property through the human is caused by its contingency. Property is pedagogical form through which we learn to value life differently. Not even speaking of the poem compels the human being to embody difference, a medium through which we alter the trajectory, survival that does not start and end with the human, critique of transforming human, pointing out the definition of human within capitalism, humanism, property, instead of a form of spiritual, is a spirit that is incompatible, with survival. So this means that the one ace, the negative instantiation on particular generals, it's also linked to this argument because how can we come to forward a pedagogy that is one that is positioned not only in the objectified position, but it's also one of undecided bill of Spillers in 87. The respective subject position of female, male, and his symbolic integrity for current critical discourse and pause toward gender undecidability would appear reactionary if not dumb to insist that the integrity of female, male gender, but addressing the conflictions of meaning, one concern not only the power of the female, but also the power of the male. Now I will do their reading and highlight Munoz dispute. You can go to the cross-examination of the one, the two AC. The fact that they cannot tell you if they will go for the permutation, if they will defend whether or not the alternative or the negative performance is a bad idea, is a problem. Means they actually don't have access to Munoz's theories, theory about futurism. Guns actually says that futurist theories like future theorists call like supposedly Munoz like argue against Edelman's queer politics must be radically futurist because of the dire unacceptability of the present political situation. The fact that they cannot tell you what the future will look like in 20 minutes in a day, have no goddamn access to futurism. Now you can follow this very carefully. They do not get a permutation. A is the point is normative competition. The affirmative, the point of the permutation assumes a non-sequitur plan B counterplan theory of competition, which would normally require trade-offs into some democratic policy. As per normal means, however, this notion of competition is incompatible for this kind of debate because Bostosha doesn't give way to that kind of literature. However, these notions of competition are competition, rational competition of ideas are one reason why they may not access hip-hop pedagogy, because hip-hop pedagogy is not one that is situated in the democratic liberalist model that says, hey, you need to negate you need to contest my work, but rather how can you fuck with my work? How can you redeploy my work? And second, is that their notion of competition is predicated on notions of liberalism and enlightenment and Western order and second, and third is that they are established by and for white people, which means that we will always be moved into subjection. Do you have this restart or no? Which will always move us into subjection, which is the disavowal of the ontology, epistemology that comes with the objects. Is reason 12. Subjecting the imagined completing the body is the non-human, is the subjecting the imagined non-human, is the third subjecting the imagined commodity, the disorder, the retrobate, potentially disavowality, in fact, the pulse and state, rescott, and extract, pressing minor, and let me notion human brain, you're under the rubric of the black object, becoming a human abjection of the black object is cleaned up, the pushing, the exploration of the black object, epistemology, and ontology to the margins, objects can and do resist, foxes, troubles, birds, and challenge the relationship between legal and philosophical category, the human notion of activity, the human never exists. We have never been human, and we have never mattered. This means that there is no net benefit to the permutation, because who gives a fuck about your house? Who gives a fuck about your life, about your body? No one. We are worth $10, which is why, which we see that there isn't shit to solve. There's no language, no bodies to pick up on the ground, no homes to reclaim. You have no power to save same bodies, the same bodies which you vote. NEG on presumptions, the animal murder piece of evidence of also the clips of lesbians batting saying, look at my child laying on the ground for hours. How can I save him? No one. Queer mothers, black mothers cannot save him. This is Gums and 10. Survival is not just about the body and presence of the body, but all in the bare sense beyond this. Survival refers not just ideal, but also the spirit beyond. The body exists in lifetime. The individual died is not death. Death is not the limited power challenging for most, but alive. Death is not the limited power, but rather a means through which power reproduces itself. And by exercising for meaning, by power chases down, raises words, action, feminist, understood here, girl, beyond this. Survival places the pressure around the definition of what life is. It makes acts of ideological, physical, psychological, economic violence. Death to our spiritual well-being, even when our physical bodies are let in text. So the framework for you is want to deviate from these ways, these claims of humanism, a democratic order, democratic order. This is reason 12. Putting two pedagogies into relation creates a real intellectual practice, black Western thought, subverting human tradition versus the adjective, the violence of back, just without speaking to bring it subjective being objects, I've had smart philosophy into order in order to the human. I would have flashed all that card. Actually, I have a paper copy somewhere. Here's that card. Oh, my bad.
Can I go use the bathroom? No.
I upload everything on one sheet of paper. I'm gonna have an overview, and then I'm gonna signpost where to go after that. Yeah, I guess it's case. Okay. All right, so everybody ready? So this overview goes on case, and then after that, all right, so everybody ready?
The role of the judge is to view this debate round through the lens of gentrification and criminalization. This is key because Black and Latino people are going through a process of becoming. That's the LS2K card. This process of becoming allows us to regain our identities and create new ethnicities, which is what the Marquez evidence is also talking about. We liberate Black and brown zombies. This is going to be a fundamental impact in the round. Our performance of hip hop is the reclaiming of is the redrawing of graffiti within these spaces and creating of new ethnicities. Out to the K. All right, so onto the critique, you're going to weigh out impacts of gentrification against the impacts that they're claiming in round one. Is the sampling argument. They distort the meaning, which is the same logic of the white redrawing of the graffiti, painting over our graffiti. When I say the colonists or the white people got it painting over the homie crap, that's the gentrification that they're doing when they sample the NEG and then they create new meanings of it. That's an example of the whiteness that gentrifies our hoods. Also, there's an impact turn to the sampling argument, which means that they can never access the sovereignty of the NEG because their sampling creates meanings that are not there. Also, the sampling is a criminalization of the affirmative hip hop because they talk about how this form of hip hop is this form of hip hop.
Sampling is good because
sampling is good. Like think of the ballot as intellectual currency for the album of the affirmative speech. So if you sample, that means that you're paying me with the ballot, which means that we win. Their sampling is violent because they criminalize our resistance. There's a reason to reject negative. This justifies, but they also justify the permutation through the sampling because you can do you, we can do us. There's no mutual exclusivity, which is created by the negative. The mutual exclusivity, which is created by the negative, is the criminalization of our access to the land, which is the gentrification, because they can kick us out of the land by saying that we don't even deserve the land or we don't deserve to be in these spaces. Also,
say that it's not a move towards humanism.
This is not a move towards humanism.
It's not a move towards humanism that their evidence indicates.
Oh yeah, this is not a move towards humanism that their evidence indicates. It's just the process of becoming that hip hop is allowing us to create new ethnicities for ourselves. Also, onto this ownership. The ownership. We solve for ownership. We solve for the impacts of ownership because the gentrification is what causes roaches not to have a stable locus. But when we solve that gentrification, when we stop the reclaiming of the hood by white bodies, then we can solve for the inability to claim a home for yourself, the inability to be in a stable space. We also Right. So we problematize notions of property by saying that the ability for the white people to reclaim lands that are not theirs is what causes the gentrification and criminalization. So they criminalize the black body and say that this land is not theirs. This land is the land of the white body. But we're problematizing that notion with the hip hop by reclaiming our spaces. This stuff is ahistorical. You can extend to Johnson, which talks about how we need to have an entitlement to the land, which allows us to create a spatial identity, which allows us to create resistance to forms of domination. Their form of resistance to domination would mean that we don't have the spatial entitlement, which means that they can never solve for the affirmative, which means that when you look at it through the lens of gentrification and criminalization, they can never solve for these impacts within the round. Also you give us extend our Munoz evidence, which says that we are moved towards creative futurism because the affirmative creates a space that is not seen in the normative forms of debate. Where we are always criminalized within these spaces, but our moving away from that criminality, which is the Ellis evidence, means that we are a queer form of resistance that the affirmative is not fundamentally answering. They're not answering how hip hop is bad. They're not answering how we're not solving for this moving away.
About materiality, but our education is key.
They have a framing issue about materiality, but our education is key because the education in the debate space is gentrified. We have an internal impact within the debate community. The education that's produced in the debate space is gentrified, but their materiality does nothing to change the gentrified education in the debate space.
say that our permutation is a performance.
The
of us as
permutation is
roaches?
a performance of us as roaches. When they say that they can't understand what our permutation does, or they can't understand whether or not we're going for it, it's our performance as roaches. We're moving through these spaces. We're moving through these spaces, but we're not having a stable locus point for them to be able to target us and criminalize us.
Say that they have not explained what roaches mean.
They have not explained like the fundamental solvency of what the roach does. Like how does that actually solve for the criminalization of the black body, which allows them to be stomped out when they are the roaches? How does that solve for the criminalization?
Solving for gentrification allows us to solve for
Solving for gentrification allows us to solve for the physical roaches who have no homes, who are nomads, who are pushed out by these spaces. When we create stable locus points for them to be, they can no longer be stomped out of these spaces because we have solved for the gentrification. They don't talk about how we don't solve for gentrification. So you give us full weight on our ability to solve for gentrification. Also, the Gates evidence talks about African American exceptionalism, where they push out the idea of Latinos, the idea of Latinas being a part of the movements, that resist systems of domination. This is very problematic. It's a turn to their solvency because they don't actually account for the Latinos. All they're talking about, they say the word cucaracha, which gives them access to Latinos, but they're not offering any real scholarship of how these Latinas create resistance.
We're not in a double bind.
We're not in a double bind because we're not in a double bind. The at sign is important because we're not creating new signifiers. We're saying that this at sign destroys those signifiers. So that's a solvency term, which means that the affirmative actually solves for the binary that they have created. There's external impact from the focus on black women, which is the transgenders, which is what the evidence is talking about.
Now, the 1AR is simply too late on this question of what your role as the judge is. Now, you can extend the interpretation that I'm giving you at the top of the 2C is that you, as the adjudicator, are to decide who produces a form of pedagogy within this academic space that allows for the circulation of scholarship, which creates a mode of survivability within these spaces. We say that the affirmative has propagated a form of pedagogy that you don't have the ability to evaluate because all the impacts are there. They are extrapolating out of the 1AC and the 2AC are all predicated on externalization outside of your ability to balance to signify to encapsulate any of those problems. They talk about how neighborhoods are gentrified, how there's a pushing out of our literal bodies within these spaces. We say no, within the academic space there's no ability to remedy those forms of material violence because it creates a mode of voyeurism where we become complacent in these systems of violence. Rather, it's our role to produce a form of scholarship within these academic spaces that deconstructs the forms of colonial violence that allow for our spirit, disengage for our ability for our spiritual survival to exist in the first place. Now, this is the Edmund Barnett evidence, which is impact framing that they don't ever, or that the 1AR doesn't articulately answer. It says that we don't need to focus on our body, that we don't need to focus on the material because our survival as black and brown bodies is always through the scholarship that we are able to produce. Audrey Alexis Gumbs does not have her, does not formulate her survivability off of her physical ability to be located in spaces. Rather, she's actually a nomadic scholar. How she does survive, how she does produce further modes of scholarship that allows for survivability is by the poetry that Audre Lorde and June Jordan left behind. Those pieces of poetry, those pieces of poetry, that knowledge that was left in the trash cans, that was left in the archives and libraries and left in the undercommons of the universities through that transaction that survival politics is able to persist outside of our body. The 1AC literally dooms our survivability off of whether or not we are able to occupy certain spaces. They say that we need to take back the spaces that white people took from us. That creates a constant cycle of taking and retaking, which makes their violence cyclical. Now, that's all the extrapolation coming out of the 1AR. Now, they haven't dealt with the alternative of queer black maternity. We say that we need to produce improperly within these spaces, that we need to produce a form of poetics that subverts the way that colonialism and claims of propriety and ownership operate within the academic debate space. Now, it is extremely problematic that they are dealing with this question because Tiffany King in 13 evidence that I'm reading makes a clear isolation on how when we try to encapsulate when we try to make these arguments of we can all talk about black and brown together, that we can reclaim the land together, that we can reclaim our work from colonialism together, ignores the ways in which these ties to ownership have always created intracommunal forms of violence between black and brown bodies. Now, Tiffany King isolates the ways in which the black female body, the reproductive body, is seen as inherently problematic to the space that the native of the brown body occupies. Now, this is going to be a turn to the case because they propagate this idea because they ignore the ways in which intracommunal violence has always happened when we predicate property or claims of ownership over our genealogy and how we can disrupt that through our Gately evidence, which is the sampling question. Now, they say that the access sampling, that sampling means that the affirmative is one, a good idea, that hip-hop is a good idea. We are saying that the pedagogy that the affirmative has produced is problematic out of the reasons not isolated above, and so rather, sampling is not an affirmation of the affirmative's good job, but we need to take the affirmative and redeploy it in a different way, that we need to take it and deconstruct the problematic modes that they have isolated, and that they have not made it clear at the point where they say sampling is good is probably a reason why you err negative on this question, because we are the only team contextualizing how sampling solvency happens within the context of the context of academic space. Now, they have not answered the Patel and 14 evidence, which says that speaking truth to power, calling out systems individuals assumes ethical differentiality, marginalized or absolved from their own implication, maintaining colonial power. Now, this is the Tiffany King analysis that I'm doing above. Also, they have no access to the impact framing and access to the 1AC because we have never been human. Now, this is the Reed's evidence in the cave humanism. Also, this is our Gumbs and Barnett evidence that the affirmative has no defense of humanism. And do not pull a single line from whatever because it's either new, wrong, or both. Now, extend spillers, which is a warrant for the way occupying spaces of gender differentiation is problematic because it enamours the subjects as opposed to objects gender with sovereignty, which will always turn the case in second. again, their characterization of Permutation's album that they should receive credit for is exactly the problem our guns evidence outlining ownership over language is complicit with the desire power that will continue to buy and sell language just like systems gentrification will buy your mother's home dirt cheap and sell it back to white bodies like neo Harlem Renaissance which turns it after third are learning guns evidence about the need to trouble notions of the human and what he sees drive towards this human subject that says that it's long I have my house my wife picket fence my wife and kids and hood it's all good this is problematic because it replays heteronormative values that violate the spirits and bodies of people of color instead guns indicates that the position of the roach is able to interject and disrupt these kinds of claims to ownerships and humanism also.
Great. Huh? That's what, okay. All right. Also, you have an independent reason to vote negative on the performative double turn of gender, disidentification, accessibility. I did that analysis in the 2 AC of the Marquez evidence and the Holly evidence. Now you will vote them down here because they perform this violence in space where they say that the Latino with an outside is key to disrupt heteronormative violence against feminized bodies. But then they go on in their Holly evidence to use signifiers of Latino slash Latino, which they have already proved through their Holly evidence to be inherently problematic. Now that eliminates the accessibility for non-heteronormative bodies to access their politics and hip hop. Barely.
So it's going to be case and then the criticism. Alright, ready?
I'm ready to pull up.
I think the affirmative is winning a large uniqueness question that we need a multitude of strategies in order to combat this is the recent justification within the status quo or when he sees subject to how justification is happening in the status quo, but we are not a move towards humanism, which is made explicit in the 1A, or that, which means that none of their humanist arguments replicate to or responsive to the affirmative because piece of Adler's evidence indicates that we are still racialized subjects within the status quo, which means that we are still objects, we are still those things that the body that can maneuver, but a very vital piece of evidence that goes conceded in the 2 a piece of Johnson evidence that means that it says that all of their guns analysis is ahistorical because Johnson explains that there has been a historical method where people of color have had spatial entitlement with their work to preserve their space, which means that they would necessarily say that the hip-hop movements in the Bronx were bad because people of color began to recreate themselves through hip-hop. We say that this is not bad, that instead we should be more in line with the way that the strategies of hip-hop have been used to allow for property space to occur. Now we do not allow for any of their humanism impacts the actual impacts of the affirmative because evidence gives us some defense to these arguments, and he talks about the way that when Black and Latino people work together within political strategies, we can create new forms of ethnicities. Therefore, a white person may be telling me that me trying to preserve my property may be bad because I don't have ownership to our body, but when Latinos and Blacks create a relationship to one another, like the story that I said in the Toy Scene where my mother goes to an Afro-Latina's house and she says that she goes to her house, which is an independent reason why you can vote affirmative that we are not a recreation of the property of the humanist property that the affirmative is talking about now. Very damning concession in the the permutation that says that we are also can use a permutation to become the cockroach. Our argument is that gentrification in the status quo. We live in the hood. We live in the hood. Cockroaches are all over. But saying after I've left too much peanut butter around the sink. Our argument is that gentrification is key to solving for physical roaches within the status quo. With physical roaches, so our facial entitlement is key. Now, this argument about how multiple strategies is good is because our permutation allows us to create a sense of cockroaches where we have multiple strategies in order to combat system of repression. However, answer his framing argument that is answered by also our piece of Johnson evidence that goes conceded that he says that we have no material impacts coming out of this debate. But our argument is that you have not proven that our strategies cannot exist within the same world that we can do us in Brooklyn and Queens, and you can do you at wherever it is. That we have a couple of dissets to our locality arguments that we have to talk about specific places that we're from. That's the entirety of the analysis of the one that talks about that we are from Brooklyn, we are from Queens, and we have to have specific orientation to the activism according to the spaces that we're from. Therefore, when he concedes the permutation, it's a fundamental reason as to why multiple strategies of the cockroaches are good, and the permutation is the only enactment of the cockroach within the status quo. Now, if I'm able to have defense to any of their offensive arguments, an independent reason why you can vote affirmative. Now, he says that our survival strategy through scholarship will always be commodified. This is an impact turn to the entirety of the affirmative because this piece of evidence that he reads about, the Tiffany evidence indicates that our scholarship will always be muted within the status quo. So what stops the negative from being muted or being commodified within the status quo? Also, our argument is that goes conceded is that sampling only proves that the affirmative is good, that the negative cannot exist without the affirmative, that they cannot have sampled the affirmative. Therefore, we want more people in the status quo, kids in the hood, to sample our music because this allows us to get knowledge. Gentrification is another reason why you can prefer the permutation. How he makes an argument about how we have to position the Black female body within the status quo, but the 1AR has extended the piece of Gates evidence that indicates that a focus on the Black female body doesn't allow us to understand the way that Latinas can also be Black within the status quo, which means that you make Puerto Rican Black females, Dominican Black females to a position of American Black feminism within the status quo, which is an independent culture genocide argument that goes conceded in this debate. Now, he makes an argument about how you can vote negative on presumption because of the way that his framing is necessarily good. But our argument is that historically, our claiming back of our lands is good. That's a piece of Johnson evidence. Now, even if win his larger framing issue, I think that we're winning some defense to why the act is good. Our piece of evidence indicates that re-signification happens in this debate. That we say that metaphors are placed onto people of color in the status quo, Black as criminal, Latino as illegal. All of these metaphors are placed within the status quo. Now, that's placed within the status quo. Now, the performance of the P1AC was one where Jason was able to recreate the self in this debate round, which means that you have a material impact in this debate that we're even able to solve. Even if you don't think that our education can be material outside of this debate, we can give you something that you can vote for. That's why when Jason says that you give us capital, you give us the ballot for capitalists, you believe that you can solve for an instance of material violence within material violence within the status quo. Now, this we will have another external impact that I think that goes conceded, and another defense as to why you should about the affirmative should still be assumed. Now, their use of the @ symbol on Latinos is necessarily good because of the external impact of transgender subjects. What if black men who are Black women see themselves as genderqueer, see themselves as alternative forms of subjectivity, or performing what it means to be a subject or an object in the status quo? They do not give room for those people to exist within the status quo. That's why our use of the Latino @ symbol is critical to solving for the external impact of transgender subjects within the status quo. Now, in a world where we can have multiple strategies so that cockroaches aren't just in one place. Cockroaches are in Rutgers, cockroaches exist in Newark, cockroaches exist in New York, which is the way that we're framing the permutation in this debate, that because of our Johnson evidence that indicates that we have to have spatial entitlement and have resistances according to a space, there's no reason why, at the end of the day, a permutation that also affirms our enactment of our resistance as the cockroach doesn't solve 100% of the negative.